Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to the Post Up with David Grubb right here on Boat Crew Media. Happy Mardi Gras to you. I, of course, am David Grubb. Glad you could join me. You could be anywhere, and you're spending your Tuesday evening right here talking New Orleans Pelicans. As we get ready, Pelicans have a little more time before they resume play after the All-Star break. But there's some things that are definite questions about the New Orleans Pelicans as far as what the second half really about 26 games, but what the remainder of this season will accomplish for this team because there has to be some point to this. You're not chasing a draft pick, and we're just going to move past that. But you're not chasing a draft pick. So what are you trying to accomplish over the remainder of this season? There are certain questions that have to be answered, and I think the number one and number two questions, and maybe these are tied together. Then maybe it's the number one question is what are you doing with this $60 million backcourt of Jordan Poole and DeJounte Murray? I think that question will loom larger than all the others because it will change the trajectory of the offseason if you can't make good decisions regarding those two players. Certainly, it looks like Jordan Poole is gone, right? Like that is done. You don't give a guy this many DNPs in a row when he's a healthy scratch. You don't do that if you're intending to keep a guy for another season. That just doesn't look like that's the case. DeJounte Murray is a different case, though. It's a little bit more nuanced. Certainly, while DeJounte looked for a trade and the Pelicans offered him the opportunity to find a trade prior to the deadline, no deal was made. Though we don't know the answer, you'd have to question whether or not there's a tremendous market for DeJounte. So the Pelicans are in the position of doing two things. Number one, do they adjust their lineup so much that they allow DeJounte the opportunity to showcase himself as a starter? Though even though the Pelicans are 5-4 out of their last 9 games with this new starting lineup that seems to be performing fairly well outside of some defensive lapses. Do you upset that by putting DeJounte back into the starting lineup and hoping that he can do the things that he did at his peak? Can he attack downhill? Can he create easy shots for other people? Can he run a pick and roll offense for the Pelicans who still struggle with just running that play? Can he create some easy shots? And then on the defensive end, can he be a point of the attack defender and stop people from getting into the paint so easily? Can he help create turnovers? And will he minimize his own? Remember, the last couple of years, DeJounte has turned the ball over a lot. And the Pelicans, part of the reason they've been able to be more competitive as of late is that they've reduced their turnovers tremendously down to around under 11 per game. So if you are adjusting that lineup to put DeJounte in the starting lineup, what impact does that have on the starting lineup? But also, how does that impact the bench? Because we've just started to see with in the backcourt, we're just starting to see with Jeremiah Fears. We're just starting to see him start to find his way again, his confidence. So he's already on the bench. But if we're moving somebody else to the bench, that would likely be Herb Jones. So if Herb Jones goes back to the bench, now you put actually a pretty decent. You've stabilized the bench in some regards with Fears and with Herb Jones. But the question now is how does that guard rotation work? How many minutes are you getting for Jeremiah Fears, and how many minutes are you playing he and DeJounte Murray together, and what does that look like? And does that hinder Fears' growth? Because that has to be one of the focal points, and we'll move to that one in just a minute. So with Jordan Poole, what do you do here? You can't. I think it's a problem to have him showing up every day if he's not going to get the opportunity to play. You are taking a spot from someone who could be getting minutes. He's healthy. Either play him. To me, it seems either play him or put him on injured reserve or do something or release him or whatever it is you're trying to do. Because to have him sitting there, I think it's not good for Jordan Poole. It's not good for the New Orleans Pelicans. And it's not good for just maintaining some semblance of We're trying to progress. I mean, you're just not going to have an engaged player when he knows he's not going to play, that he's wearing street clothes basically every night. Either put him on the permanent inactive list or something, just send him to the G League, whatever you're going to do. But it's just this can't continue. DeJounte Murray, 26 games. How does this audition go? Even if it's likely could be fewer because we still don't have a timetable for him. So let's say he gets back in March. The stretch provision does exist, and the Pelicans could, cut that pay up. They could waive him and cut his pay, his remaining owed pay, over a number of years. That is an option, but it's not one the Pelicans are likely to take because of the financial decisions that they've made in the past. I don't think that them having him on the roster and not and then paying him not to work, that's just not what Gail Benson wants to do. Something could change in that regard, but I think it's an untenable situation. It's bad for everybody. Like I said, there's no upside here in keeping Jordan Poole over there. You cannot rebuild his reputation this offseason. You can't do it. You can't enhance his value now. So what are you doing here? That mistake, I think, of not trading him prior to the break and just taking whatever you could get because you had decided he's not part of the future. Take whatever you can get at this point. Get somebody who wants to be on your roster, or is at least looking for an opportunity to play, and let Jordan Poole go find his future. But to do this, I think this is another one of the decisions for the Pelicans that are going to be examined heavily in the offseason. And so my second question is, what is the front office doing? What is the plan here? Because you're still operating a roster as if you're on two different timelines. You don't have a team that's good enough to compete with the best in the West. And you are not bad enough, nor do you have the assets to start building around the two young players that you have already. You are in the dangerous middle. You failed to make moves prior to the deadline that made sense, other than getting rid of the fans' favorite player, who, even if his role was too big for New Orleans, he represented all the things you wanted on this team. And to let him go in the middle of it for nothing, for a player you released immediately and 2 low second-round picks, that's the best you could do for a guy who has immediately shown his value to a winning team. As many fans will sit and say right now, that's what the Pelicans always do. They are a farm team for other teams. Why do players go elsewhere and benefit, and why can't we benefit here? Talk to the front office about that question. That's not an NBA problem. That's not an agent's problem. That's not a draft structure problem. It's not an NBA lottery problem. It is a front office problem. Good front offices make good decisions. Bad front offices remain in mediocre to bad positions. There's a reason that the Pelicans front office continually gets rated amongst the worst in the NBA. Through administration to administration. It's because it's all bad. When you are exhibiting cronyism in the building, in how you pick your coaches and how you pick your executives and how you treat those coaches and executives, this is the result you get. When you consistently say, we just want to be in the hunt, you've made no real financial or player commitment to being a championship team. You have not qualified. You've only had back-to-back winning seasons, like twice in franchise history. Like you have a structure that is meant to be mediocre. You have 11 losing seasons in 15 years. That's not a team with direction. So what is this front office going to do about that? You have the one thing you can say is yes, Troy Weaver has been pretty adept at picking out draft talent. But the Pelicans, by and large, and this is the part that people have to be truthful about, by and large, the Pelicans, from where they've drafted, have made good decisions outside of certainly Zion's second year. When you take, I can't even remember his name right now, at Alabama. I can't remember the kid's name. He was that flash in a panish. But outside of that, year to year, you've done pretty well. At least it's panned out that way. Nickeil Alexander-Walker averaging 20 a game. Kyra Lewis, that's right. Thank you. Nickeil Alexander-Walker averaging 20 a game for Atlanta right now. So you see him and his development. Jackson Hayes certainly has not panned out. So that was a mistake, and that was held against David Griffin. But overall, Trey, Herb, Jose as an undrafted, Najee as an undrafted, adding the young players you've had to pick it up, Micah, in the second round. You've drafted and signed young players, Carlo and his development. You're paying a guy $2 million, and Carlo's played above probably what you expected. Misi at the spot that he selected. So you can't really complain about where the Pelicans have drafted and what they've got. That hasn't been the problem. The problem has been choosing a direction on what you're putting around those pieces. And in many ways, Joe Dumars and company are paying the price for some of the mistakes that David Griffin made. But you can't build on top of those same mistakes by making the exact same decisions. And that decision apparently is to try to build a team on two timelines. Because that's the message you sent by not making some of these deals prior to the deadline. You're still thinking about building around both of these groups of players. And you cannot do that, because what it's going to require next season for the Pelicans to be, if you were building around the current timeline, if you're saying we're keeping Saadiq, we're keeping Zion, we're keeping Trey, we're putting on Misi. You know what I'm saying? Like, if you're keeping all that and you say we're going to go out and we're going to get a point guard and we're going to get a center, okay, you can do that. But there's no way in year two you're asking Derek Queen to run the offense and giving him the kind of freedom that you're giving him this year if you're legitimately trying to chase something next year. And what does that mean to Derek Queen then? Because then he's making a decision and you're making a decision in year three to extend. And he's thinking about his long-term future, because now you're in position to chase a championship if that's what you're trying to do with Zion and Trey and that group. If you stick with the youngsters, then if you're playing a veteran point guard and you have to have another veteran on the bench, what are you now doing with what is more likely to be a scoring player in Jeremiah Fears? Are you converting him to a six-man type role? And then what are you doing with Herb Jones? Because you now are in a position to have to move him. So you're forcing moves that you would already have to make to continue to build a roster that is not going to get you into the top three in the West. Because you're not going to be in position to get the franchise player you're looking for. And you don't have to be as bad as people think now to get that best player. Who are the players that are winning championships right now? The best players in the league. How many of them were drafted number one overall? How many of them were drafted number one overall? It's not as important because of the way the lottery is flattened. It's not as important to get a number one. Last year, how many teams got shifted around trying to get into the top three? None of them were there. The Pelicans weren't there. The Wizards weren't there. The Jazz weren't there. So if there's no guarantee, and we're seeing some of these players, there are very few drafts when the number one guy is the number one guy. And even with that, going back 20 plus years, we know that if you don't win a championship as a number one player within your first 5 years, it is highly unlikely that you're going to do that. And I'm talking about players drafted number one overall. They don't stay with their original teams very long. So if you're trying to find your franchise player, most of those players have been located in the range from 3 to 11. Where was Steph Curry drafted? Where was Giannis drafted? Where was Dwayne Wade drafted? It's 3 to 11 is where you're finding Dirk Nowitzki. Where was he drafted? Where are your championship players? They're not in the top 3 right now. That's not where they were drafted. Outside of Cade Cunningham, who's in that position, a number 1 player, who's still very early in his career, but had a team that's been built around his skill set and an organization that decided not to rush it. And you could say Troy Weaver's part of that. Sure, but Troy Weaver did not build the team that's the rest of the complementary pieces around Cade Cunningham over the last 2 years. The teams that Troy Weaver has directly overseen have been losing teams over the last few years. So you can only give him so much credit. And like I said, you can give him the credit for identifying the talent, but there's very little confidence around the league that this duo of Dumars and Troy Weaver can identify talent, but they can't develop a team. And if you can't develop a team in a draft that you have no picks in, and they're talking about franchise players at the top of this draft and it being stacked in the middle as well, and you're out of that, then you will have to choose your direction very carefully. Because it makes sense to me that if you're going to develop the young players, then go ahead and trade Herb Jones. If you can get 2 number 1s for Herb Jones, then get those number 1s. You don't look back when somebody's offering you 2 number 1s for a reserve, a guy that you're thinking about putting on the bench. Yes, Herb makes you better, but 2 first-round picks, take the picks. You can hold on to Trey Murphy. He fits either timeline. But Zion's contract makes this a question. And that's the third question. What are you doing with Zion? If you say he's still a centerpiece player, but he's not your franchise player, what is your plan to get a franchise player very quickly? Like, nobody's going to have anything to say tonight about me being a Zion hater. I'm not going to get into that, but I'm asking the question, the very realistic question. If even the people who love Zion Williamson say that we have to understand what he is and what he is not. So, okay, so we will all acknowledge that he is a very good basketball player, but he is not a top 10 to 15 basketball player, right? You need a top 10 to 15 player, more likely a top 5 to 10 player to win a championship in the NBA. So if you don't have that, you will be going into year 8 next season with Zion Williamson. You know his career is more than likely had more years already gone than there are ahead. If you think there are 7 full seasons of Zion left, you would probably be in the minority. So if that's the case, then what are you doing to get that franchise player immediately? And who are you identifying as such? Because they're not really out there. What franchise player is available? Are you going to get a 35-plus-year-old Kyrie Irving at this stage who's coming off a major injury? Who are you building your team around? Because you can't say we're going to get another good player. That team is not getting to the finals in the West, not with what the Spurs are building in San Antonio, not with what the Thunder already have and can continue to add to with the number of picks that they have. So if you are deciding that Zion at $40+ million over the next 2 years per season over the next 2 years, if you're saying that that's worth it, and I'm not arguing the point, then how much can you spend? What are you spending? And who are you spending? Where are you spending that to get the franchise player who's out there? Because I don't know where that player is. And I'm not trying to be funny or facetious or whatever. I don't know where your franchise player is that you can go out and find this offseason. You may be able to find a good player, but there's not a franchise-altering player who's available to you this offseason. Not for what you have to offer, So, what are you doing with Zion Williamson? Are you turning him into a complementary piece and acknowledging that he's not the centerpiece, but you still want to have him? Are you still shopping him? Or are you trying to make him the franchise player still? You just have to make a decision. But that's the question. I'm not answering it. That's the question. And then the last part is the rookies. For Derek Queen, I think his biggest question is on the defensive end. He can get better as a shooter. You can't teach instincts as a passer or touch. You can even learn some moves in the post, which he has to do. But as a defender, the Pelicans have to figure out what position he's going to play consistently. And if that's the case, can you continue to if he's a 4, which I think we would all agree at 6'9", and his limited ability to protect the basket, if he's a 4, how do you start everybody? Like it's a very because you still need a 5. So you're playing him if Queen's your starter and you have to get a 5. Now what do you do with Saadiq Bey? Because if you're moving Zion now to the 3, so where are you putting Bey? And where's your point guard? And where's Trey? So again, it goes back to if you can't determine where Derek Queen, either Derek Queen has to become a legitimate center at 6'9", which means he's got to get bigger quickly and become a better defender, a committed defender, because that hasn't been there, not even the commitment. If that's the case, if you're going to make him a 5, again, your lineup can be balanced. You can go and find that point guard in the offseason and you can balance your roster. But at the 4, it begets more questions because your roster is completely out of balance at that point, which is already out of balance now. So Queen at the 4, if that's his optimum position, that means he has to play further from the basket more consistently, which means he has to become a better shooter and he has to be an aggressive shooter. He's going to have to play out of the pick and roll sometimes. He's going to have to be able to play with his back to the basket. He's going to have to be able to give some kind of resistance defensively, both as a post defender and with on the perimeter. That's his biggest question mark. For Jeremiah Fears, it's can you start to finish? He's been one of the worst finishers in the NBA this season. He's got to start figuring out how to finish. Yes, too many bad defenders. And that's even on a team that has gotten better defensively as of late. They are more willing as a group. And I think, again, while they switch probably too much still, they switch less than they used to. And I think that's made it better in that regard. Certainly, to whatever extent we want to attribute Herb Jones's presence, that helps always. Even just his body being available, so it balances out the bench a little bit more when he's starting. And that group, we talked about this at the beginning of the season. The reason it struggles so much is when you have 2 rookies in your starting lineup, you can't expect to be good defensively. The Pelicans are able to give themselves a chance because they are not nearly as bad in the first quarters defensively as they had been previously. Bey and Herb give them more of a chance defensively in that starting lineup than what you had before. So we'll see if that continues. But that lineup, again, has been fairly successful, especially compared to the other lineups the Pelicans have put out there on a season. So one of the other questions is just I'll go into the second part to answer that one because there was a poll of the most overrated players in the NBA, and it's always a very interesting thing because you look at and guys like Draymond Green ended up on it, and you understand why. And Zion ended up on it this year, and the primary reason was again overall his statistics are down, and folks will argue it's because he's getting fewer touches. But there are things that you can look at on both sides, right? There are things that you can look at and you could say, that Zion is not getting touches, but you could also point to a number of occasions where he's not being as aggressive. He's shooting the highest percentage of his career within 3 feet of the rim, but he's taking fewer shots within 3 feet of the rim because he's not able to drive to the basket like he did previously. His drive numbers just are not as impactful as they had been. He's less willing to take the mid-range shot, even though it's available to him. So those are things. His assists are down, his rebounds are down, his turnovers are still low, relatively speaking. But he's also playing some of the worst defense of his career. The numbers are just showing that he's just not active on that end as well as he could be, and he's not having to guard fours nearly as often. So there's a lot of conflicting numbers with him this season, and I think that the term overrated no longer applies to Zion. And I'm not saying that, again, to be snide or funny. What I'm saying is it no longer applies because I don't think, and this is the thing about the Pelicans as a franchise, is that unfortunately, I don't think people rate Zion anymore. Like, what are you rating when we're celebrating the milestone of that he's played 30 straight games? Like, the rest of the league has moved on by and large. They will tune in for the novelty of it if he plays well. They'll tune into the novelty. They know what he's capable of. We all know what he's capable of. But he's no longer overrated because he's not rated. He can change that. He can. I'm not going to put that past any person to have the ability to do better. But I think it's like the Pelicans. It's as a franchise, the reason Trey Murphy doesn't go to the All-Star game and participate in either the dunk contest or the three-point contest is because the Pelicans just aren't thought about that way anymore. People just don't think about the Pelicans at all. You are in that place where you just don't matter in sports, that people forget that you're a team. That's not the fault of the fans. That's not the fault of the city of New Orleans. It's not the fault of anybody other than the people who either wear the uniforms or sign the checks or make the decisions. And they've got to do better. What is shown around the league is that Trey Murphy is respected highly by his peers, as Trey took some leadership in the NBA Players Association, moving up to the vice president's role in the union. That's an incredible responsibility. It's an incredible honor. And we saw that with CJ McCollum as the president. Certainly, CJ has had some influence on Trey and his understanding of what the importance of the union is. But it also, again, when you take that kind of leadership, what that means is that you are a quality teammate. Like, you look at the people who've had that, and a lot of them have had New Orleans connections, for better or for worse. Chris Paul was the president of the Players Association at one point, CJ McCollum the president, Trey now the vice president. And you look at that and all of those players are tremendous teammates. Didn't say Trey deserved to go to the All-Star game. What I said was that Trey deserved to be in the three-point contest or the dunk contest. Jackass. All right. So people don't listen, just don't make stupid comments. So back to what I was saying. Obviously, it's a big honor for Trey to get in that kind of leadership position, but it shows the people who get that typically are quality teammates. And for Trey and his role and his development in his game, I think that's important to establish him as somebody who's continuing to take leadership with this team, taking ownership of its future, whatever his ceiling is. And I think it's pretty evident that at his best, he can play at an all-star level. It's, can he play at that level consistently? That'll be the question going forward. That's always the question. That's always the question between good and great, is how consistent can you be? Can you do that every night? I don't know why Dame was there. That's crazy. I guess it's because he was defending champ, but he hadn't played the game all year. He hadn't played the game all year. I don't understand that. Like, that just seemed like he could have come back and gotten into it next year. Like, the consecutive streak doesn't matter. So I want to do this again. You are a jackass because you said all-star game. It's clear right there, right? All-star game. And you said empty stats that don't affect winning. Who was in the contest? Who was in the dunk contest? Who was in the dunk contest? Jackson Hayes was in the dunk contest. You think he had any impact on winning? Jace Richardson was in the dunk contest. He had 4 dunks. Don't try to be, don't watch anymore. I don't care. I'm not doing this. You want to be like, don't be loud and wrong. Don't be loud and wrong. You didn't mean the 3-point contest. You put it plain and simple. Now let's move on. All right. So certainly, Trey has the opportunity again to ascend higher in the league, but at a time when labor has been marginalized in this country, it's good to see players taking that seriously. I'll say that. All right, lastly, let's talk about Saddiq Bey's future. And I think it's a great question because it's also one that is going to hang over this franchise the rest of the season. Saddiq is under a fantastic contract for next season, right? Saddiq is the Pelicans have control for next year. He's outplayed every expectation this year. He's been at times the Pelicans' best player and certainly been their second most consistent this season, gotten better pretty much each and every month of this season. 3-level scorer, willing defender, streaky 3-point shooter, but consistent enough at about 36%, I think, something like that. But he's proven his value. But the question for Saddiq ties back into the very first part of this with the guards. With the guards, like, are you having to sell high really on a player that you like? But again, on this timeline, we're not counting DeJounte Murray as part of this. We're not counting Jordan Poole as part of this. So if somebody comes to you with an offer for Saddiq Bey of a first-round pick and is willing to take one of those bad contracts off your hands, what if they say, we'll take Jordan Poole and Saddiq Bey, or we'll take DeJounte Murray and Saddiq Bey, but we'll give you a first for it? What's the price? How much do you want to keep Saddiq Bey in New Orleans versus how much can he get you on the open market? Because his value will never be higher than what it is this offseason. It will never be higher. As soon as you talk about an extension, his value goes down because he's an expiring contract next year. Whatever you decide to do, if you're going to pay him, then you already have to have moved those guys. And you don't have a lot of assets to do that. You can't give away more draft capital. Your 2 best tradable assets are Herb Jones and Saddiq Bey, because people seem to be willing to overpay for both of those. So as much as you want Saddiq Bey, as much as people, want to pay Saddiq Bey, you would have to start thinking about that next year. And he's got a ton of leverage. And are you going to be willing to believe that in 2 years' time, when his money kicks in, that you'll be a championship contender? I'm not sure. So I think you really need to think about Saddiq Bey as a attachment to a major trade this offseason. And then what does it look like? The last part, I think everybody would want to talk about is James Borrego's future. And I think it's still up in the air. I think it's still 50-50 as to whether or not he's back next season, because certainly you want to have your imprint and hire your own coach. But if you're not, and if the goal is to continue to develop this group, then I think you would stay at this level. I think you would stay right here with this coach, because you're not going to pay your coach now unless this team makes a jump. Because I don't think it makes sense to invest $10 million in a head coach and then get rid of the entire staff, when at least for some of these guys, it seems to be like the numbers have gotten better. And you can say, well, it just would over time. But you went through the most difficult parts of the schedule with Borrego. Like you went, the schedule's about to get much easier, so you'd expect the stats to continue to get better if the rookies get better again, if their numbers start to uptick, if Zion puts up better numbers, if Herb finds his shot, if you're keeping all these guys at the end of the season, they should get better against worse competition as other teams start to pack it in, as other teams start to bail, and you need to stack wins to make that Atlanta pick worth less. So that question then, if they continue to get better, is there a number on the table that for the fans would mean that you'd get behind Borrego staying, or is it to you it's out no matter what, or is it I'll wait and see what happens? Because that decision certainly will have a major impact on the future of the franchise as well. Um, but I certainly think JP with an off season and a roster that he would work with could be better. I don't know how good, but again, we're talking about a Western Conference where if you're not winning 50 games, you don't have a chance. You don't have a chance. And but going by the 40-20 rule, the famous Phil Jackson 40-20 rule, you got two teams in the West that are going to get there in San Antonio and Oklahoma City. The Pistons are already there. Like, are the Pelicans that kind of team, and can they be that team in the next 2 years? I think that's really hard. I think that's really hard. So we shall see, but I think it's going to be an interesting second half of the season. I'll probably be back in a couple of days, but I thank all of y'all for tuning in on this Mardi Gras evening. I hope you're having a good time. Be safe out there. Don't get in no trouble. Don't be Shia LaBeouf and do bad bar crawls and annoy people. Until the next time, this has been the Post Up right here on Boot Crew Media. I am David Grubb. You can follow me on social media at DM Grubb. Y'all have a great one. Talk to you later.